Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me, as always, the man, the myth, the legend, the goatiest of all F1 minds to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing really well, Cameron. Yeah, some long early rises over the weekend, but back to square one now. Really good.
Yeah. How dare we complain, Peter, since they run the F1 calendar in our image for our logistical aspect 99% of the time in the one race that we have to wake up a little bit early. I moan a lot. I did moan a lot, but I digress, Peter. As is customary, what do you think was the biggest story to come out of this race weekend?
Well, I'd love to say the brilliance of Max Verstappen's win, his shining hour in many ways, but you've got to say the disqualification of both McLarens and what led up to that and the mistake they made, mistakes plural they made. It's unusual to have both cars disqualified for exactly the same reason. And that's a major problem, isn't it? And it's easy to say, well, as I think Stella did, well, Formula One's very competitive. We're always running things to the limit. And this time we didn't have quite enough margin. I mean, the reality is nobody else had that problem. And McLaren did on both cars, and they've got the best car, and they're leading the World Championship, and they're the Constructors' Champion. So there was every reason to think if anyone's going to leave a little bit more margin than most, it'll be McLaren, because they've kind of sewn everything up. And anyway, how did they do it? Yeah, as I said in the video last night, it looked like the cars were bouncing quite a lot more than most around them in the early laps on heavy fuel, which is when I think the damage would have been done. But the whole thing's very curious, even as we speak now, because why in the last 3 laps was Lando backing off massively through turn 13, which is just a kink on the straight? For what reason? I mean, that's not a fuel saving thing. That's not anything. It's just, it looks like it's massively worried about plank wear. But if that's the case, A, the damage was done much earlier. B, why did Will Joseph say we've got through the fuel issue now, it's okay? And C, what was Lando trying to achieve by doing that? The whole thing's very odd, and there are a lot of unanswered questions for me in that. The only thing that isn't unanswered, and it has a very clear line here to what happened yesterday in Vegas, is that from day one, I've been saying that it was a mistake to hire Oscar Piastri as Lando Norris's teammate at McLaren if you already had Daniel Ricciardo, because that was a really good combination. That was a combination of the ilk of Michael Schumacher, Rubens Barrichello, or Felipe Massa, or Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez. They dovetailed really well. They both brought a lot to the team in their different ways. And had they kept that driver pairing, I think Lando would possibly have even clinched the championship by now. But I don't think they'd be in the situation they're in now, whereby they've won the Constructors' Championship. And as I said at the beginning, you would think then that of all the teams, you're going to leave a little bit more margin when it comes to ride height on a plank wear sensitive circuit, it would be McLaren. On the contrary, because they've got this race now going on still between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, they cannot do anything but run the cars as pretty near the optimum as they possibly can. And that's not a great situation to have been put into for the engineers, for anyone. And you may well say, well, you know, they run whatever they run. Yeah, but if they're going to leave, I don't know, 1-2 mil margin on Lando Norris's car, and then he suddenly finds out that Oscar's running only 1 mil, how do you think that's going to reflect on the other side of the garage? Everyone's competitive, and everyone will know what ride height they're running. Ride height is not that difficult to calculate in terms of the ride height at the end of the straight, and that's when you work backwards from there and you run it whatever you need to do in order not to be bottoming at the end of the straight. And 1 millimeter equals what? I don't know, 1 or 2 points of downforce, which equals a tenth of a second. So what racing driver is ever going to say no to a tenth of a second for no increase in drag? And that's where having this competitive infighting between two sides of the garage, even if you try to have the glad, happy, let's all sit around the campfire and sing folk songs approach that McLaren now have, let's all be one big family, it never works, because race drivers are super competitive, and McLaren shouldn't be in the position that they find themselves in, having to be so on the limit on everything. Now, you could say, well, that's because they want to beat Max Verstappen. But at the end of the day, if you're running Lando Norris's car, you should be saying, he's just had 2 good wins. We're going to Vegas now, which is a bit iffy. We've had a few manhole covers come up. It's a bit bumpy. It can be a bit green. The track surface, a bit all over the place. Let's just not go anywhere near of the difficult, any of the ride height areas or any other areas of the regulations which could be a problem in those conditions. And we'll focus on Qatar and Abu Dhabi, more straightforward racetracks. And we'll just make sure Lando's on the podium in Vegas. And if he gets a win, that's great. But that's how you do it. But they couldn't do that because Lando's still conscious of wanting to beat Oscar Piastri. And so it goes on. It comes back to my original point that all of this stuff, the disqualification of the 2 cars yesterday, can be traced back to the very poor decision to replace Daniel Ricciardo. A little bit like Ferrari replacing Carlos Sainz.
Oh, we will come to that.
Yeah, we don't, it shouldn't, it's against the grain. It's not a natural thing to be doing. Daniel Ricciardo was a perfect teammate for Lando Norris.
And to that point, Peter, Zach Brown on the Beyond the Grid podcast recently said that I want to make sure if we don't win, that it's Max that beats us, that we don't beat ourselves. We're well aware of what happened in 2007, alluding, of course, to Alonso and Hamilton taking chunks out of each other and allowing Kimi Raikkonen to come in the back door and seize a Drivers' Championship. In the event, Zach Brown says, quote, that 2007 happens again, I'd rather that outcome than all the outcomes that come about by playing favourites. Some have interpreted that Zach Brown's saying that he would rather lose than put aside his rules of engagement. What do you make of that, Peter?
I don't really understand any of it, so I can't really comment. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. There's no logic to that because I only see it to the backdrop of the decision to replace Daniel Ricciardo with Oscar Piastri, who's a quicker driver than Daniel Ricciardo. I'm not in any way decrying the talent of Oscar Piastri. In fact, the opposite. I'm saying he's too good to have been alongside Lando Norris all this time. And the reason the 2 cars were disqualified was because of that decision taken by Zach Brown. And he said that whenever he said that a couple of weeks ago. Well, look what's happened. He's just had both cars disqualified from the US Grand Prix, one of the key events, the showpiece races of the year, Las Vegas, and both McLarens disqualified. Why? They didn't leave enough margin in their ride heights. Why didn't they leave enough margin? Because they're racing one another within the garage. And that's not good management, I'm afraid. I want everything. I'm greedy. I want this driver. I want that driver. I want the ride heights to be as low as possible. I want the racing to be close. I want everything to be racing. And look what happened, Look at Red Bull. Do you think anybody at Red Bull really cares about the ride heights on Yuki Tsunoda's car? The only thing they're worried about is Max is absolutely crystal clear legal at the end of the race and has the best possible race car he can have. And they run it and they put all their best guys on that one car. And that's Red Bull. They're that good, but they still have to focus like that in order to get the results. And this whole, as I say, the whole glad, happy, sit around the campfire approach of McLaren, to me, is, and he mentions 07. What about, I was around at Williams in 86 when we blew the championship for exactly the same reason. Piquet taking points from Mansell and vice versa. Alan Prost emerges as drivers' world champion. Nobody even thought about Alan going into Adelaide. And so it goes on. There's so many examples. And Michael was the guy. And it's strange, isn't it? Because when you look at drivers and the approach of teams today about, the driver's not available to talk here and you can't say this and you're not allowed to do that and you can't do this without anyone's permission. All that actually started from Michael Schumacher, of Michael basically doing a deal with German television where he's paid quite a lot of money to talk to them first and give them a nice 10-minute interview. And then everybody else got 30 seconds of Michael Schumacher. And nobody really complained because the world was changing and that was Michael Schumacher. And Michael also had in his portfolio this concept of, if you want me to be world champion, I will select the other driver. I don't want anybody who's going to start taking points away from me. And it's odd that the Formula One world has adopted the whole Michael Schumacher approach to media, but it hasn't adopted his approach. Well, some aspects of the driver of the Formula One paddock haven't adopted his approach actually to how to run a team. Red Bull obviously have, and they've done it extremely well once they got through the whole Webber-Vettel situation, and they learned from that. But McLaren are going the other way. Had a well-balanced team, and they blew it apart to the point where they've now got disqualified at Vegas. if Lando goes on to be world champion, I suppose a lot of people will say, oh, well, it didn't really matter. He's still world champion. We won the Constructors' Championship. Oops, yeah, Vegas was a bit of a blip. But taken in isolation, this is a huge thing. They go on and on about the number of people at the factory who work on the car and the backers and the sponsors and the stakeholders and everyone involved in bringing a Formula One car to the starting grid, and to have both cars disqualified. That is huge. That's somebody should be called to account for that.
The optics aren't great, are they, Peter? Let me ask you about the way that the FIA handled the investigation and the subsequent disqualification, because F1 fans around the world were waiting and waiting. I want to say it's something like 2.5 hours, 3 hours between the end of the race and the announcement that both McLarens had been disqualified. What do you make of that, Peter? Because I know that you're familiar with Bernie Eccleston, who always used to say that F1 fans need to be able to trust the result, full stop, new paragraph, and that it's not good for F1 when you have these revisions, these retroactive revisions, 3-4 hours sometimes after the event.
Well, I've got to correct you there. I don't ever remember Bernie saying that. In fact, Bernie was the complete opposite. He ran the South African Grand Prix in '81, shaking hands with the winner of the race on the grid before the start, saying this is a championship round, and then 3 months later took the points away. So I don't see how that works with any of that stuff you just quoted from Bernie. No, I don't. It doesn't worry me, that side of things, because we're talking millimeters and we're talking mitigating circumstances. We're talking accident damage. There's so many grey areas of that rule. And I'm shocked that they got it out as quickly as 2 hours, to be honest. I think the FIA did an amazing job. Good on Joe Bauer. He takes a holiday at the end of every year on his Goldwing Harley, I think, or Honda, whatever it is, a Harley, I think. And he's well deserved that holiday this year, because that was a difficult call to make on both McLarens, and they did it pretty quickly, I think. So the FIA should be given massive plaudits for that.
A lot of people, Peter, are saying that the next couple of rounds will be won and lost at the altar of ride height games. That Alonso, for the past couple of race weekends, has been looking at some of these cars that haven't brought upgrades for 5-6 races, and all of a sudden you're seeing these material upticks in performances. Some are saying that McLaren was super marginal on ride heights, even as recently as the Brazilian Grand Prix. Now, no harm, no foul ultimately. But do you think that McLaren might see a downside because they've got to be more conservative with their ride heights going into Qatar and Abu Dhabi, the last 2 rounds of 25?
No, I don't. I think a lot of that stuff is not really relevant. But that stuff you just quoted from the outside sources, I think this is all about bouncing. And I think the only thing we should be saying is, wow, we didn't realize there was still that much bouncing in Formula One. And looking back now and look back at a few races, you can see the McLaren does bounce more than most. Certainly in Vegas it was in the early laps. And other teams have still got bouncing as well. So obviously that is something you have to build into your ride height calculation. And going into the last 2 races, I don't see bouncing being a major issue at either Qatar or Abu Dhabi. Famous last words, who am I to say that? But I think they're both more clinical linear circuits, and I think it's going to be, I don't think it'll be a big issue. And so for a team like McLaren to get it wrong, what they've done is said, right, this is the ride height we're going to run. And they've got more bouncing than they thought they would have. And the reason for that was because of all the reds we had in FP2 on Friday in the dry, and virtually no running on full tanks. There was a little bit of sort of fuel saving towards the end and of the session, trying to sort of get some sort of extrapolation for the tire guys, but it wasn't really real. And then with the rain on Saturday, it's no excuse because everybody was in the same boat. But McLaren, maybe with more bouncing than most, with no experience with full tanks, the damage was done in the first 10 laps, I would say. And you could say, and then get from that, well, that's racing, isn't it? Well, is it racing? Because everybody else did build in enough margin based on not having the information from Friday. And as I said at the start of this, of all the teams that should be building in a margin, it's McLaren. They've already won the Constructors' Championship. They've got absolutely every reason to be conservative. And Lando's got every reason to be thinking, well, it could be a difficult race, got a lot of bouncing here. I just want to be on the podium, keep the points ticking over. Instead of which it was, oh, well, what's Oscar doing? Got to run as low as possible. And look what happened.
Yeah. No, not a good outcome.
No, it's not. And it's all related to the bouncing. I mean, there was one thing out there saying that it was because of the graining of the fronts, they moved the aero balance back with the front flap adjustment. But it doesn't make any sense to me, because if you've got graining on the front, you'd actually increase the aero balance to the front, would you not? And so how does that work? I don't understand that at all. I think people are reading into it more than actually is happening. And it's just about the bouncing, McLaren not doing any running like everybody else on the Friday, and then the bouncing being worse on the McLaren. But then, as I say, unanswered questions, why Lando's lifting through turn 13 on the last 3 laps at 200 and whatever it was, 85 kilometers an hour. And then Will saying, we're okay now, you can not do that so much because we're looking like we're on top of fuel now. I mean, if fuel was just a ruse and really they were worried about the ride height, why would he suddenly say, oh, we're okay now? That doesn't make any sense either. Did McLaren have some sort of sensor, load sensor, which actually tells them what the ride height is at the back, what's going on? I mean, if they do, amazing. Absolutely amazing. I doubt it, but they might have. And maybe that's what Lando was driving, in accordance with.
Yeah. So
I doubt it. I very much doubt it, because that sounds like, something that's unbelievably difficult to do.
So speaking of Lando, Peter, a lot's been made of the resurgence of Lando Norris 2.0. That everything that he'd been doing wrong erstwhile this season, he's all of a sudden fixed at the altar of a couple of different things. He's changed his mental coach. He's now more focused on the present and achieving his flow state. He's taken off the delta from the steering whilst he's in qualifying, because he says that distracts him, and then all of a sudden he can nail race restarts, he can nail a race start. But then you get the start at Las Vegas, and you're like, that Lando, whilst I think he was brilliant in his defensive posture off the line, then all of a sudden going into turn 1, it's as if Lando Norris 1.0 has forgotten that he actually needs to brake to make a turn. What do you make of Lando's start and the lack of burnouts? Is there something to this theory that Lando doesn't do well multitasking in the heat of a moment under pressurised circumstance?
Well, the 5 burnouts that Max did compared with, I think it was 3 from Lando, is a function of the race engineers and what they're seeing on the tyre temperatures and the clutch and what information they have from the practice starts. So if there's that's nothing to do with multitasking, that's just an error. Another error, you could say, by the technical guys on the pit wall at McLaren. They didn't get him to do enough burnouts, if that was the problem. It looked to me more like a clutch thing. And although you say you liked the way he angled the car across straight away, I mean, bear in mind, he was slow off the line relative to Max, and he's on the clean side of the road. I think he actually magnified that problem by immediately going so harshly to the left off the clean side and starting to pick up crud just to the left of the groove, which is always there on a street circuit, and then really getting it down the inside going into turn 1. So, I think Max looks like he's just thinking, what is this guy doing? Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, right. All I got to do here is just take a nice line through the corner. I think he overreacted to everything that went wrong there. And if he'd moved a little bit to the left, maybe, I don't think it would have made that much difference. If he'd stayed on the clean side of the road, Max probably would have got it down the inside, but who knows? Max might well then have locked up himself and gone out, run wide. He might have, if that's what Lando should have been trying to get Max to do, I think, at that point. But even so, once you've done that on the acceleration run, you're slightly slower. You then try to come back down the inside, and even then, you make sure you keep the tires clean, and 3 or 4 laps into the race, you got DRS, and then you got a race on your hands. Instead of which, everything was discombobulated, and he had the tires went away behind George, and it was all too. I don't know if that comes under the heading of multitasking. I think it comes under the heading of, he made a bad start, clutch, maybe not enough burnouts, not his fault, but certainly as a driver, I think it was too aggressive, that move to the left.
Yeah. I mean, if he just jinx to the right and tries that. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of. There's not a lot of road in which to do this, but he doesn't make any attempt to try and reassume the racing line. I was just like, what are you doing, Lando? That to carry that amount of speed on such a tight line with full tank of fuel, cold tyres. As soon as you see that Max goes across, you've got a jink across, as would a Lewis or a Michael or Max. There's no way that any of those top tier drivers would have attempted to take that amount of speed through that turn on that line. I'm just like, Lando, come on, mate. You're better than this.
Well, I think he's just a victim there of having driven the best car in Formula One all year, and how good that car is, and whatever angle he gets it at, he can usually bring it back. And look at his pole lap on the intermediates. Look at the angle at which he was hitting those curbs towards the end. Yeah. And that's a very chuckable, drivable, Brabham-like race car. It's a beautiful car, that McLaren. And I suppose you do get lulled into thinking you can basically do whatever you like with it because it's a great car. Maybe it was, underneath there was that underlying feeling as well. I can do this, and I just want to stay in front. I don't know. To me, it's somebody at McLaren, at the top at McLaren, is not saying to Lando, podium, 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 rather than win, win, win. And they're not saying that because that opens the door slightly to Oscar Piastri, which brings me back to my point. If you're trying to win a championship, you don't want a guy as quick as Piastri in the other car, even though he's going through a slump at the moment. And it comes right from the top. All this is top level management decision stuff. It's not, Lando on the road stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Easy to manage drivers. It's not that difficult. You just got to have a very high 30,000 foot view of what is the best way to run a championship. What is the best way to get the best from this driver? And to make sure that everybody's basically on the same page.
Yeah.
Well, they were obviously with Bright Heights, but but that was that's a bit spurious, isn't it?
Do you think, just to double click on Lando for a second, Peter? I've heard it said as a thesis that even if Lando loses the championship, that this is almost a massive win. That he's kind of, because he's been able to hunker down and focus on his process, that we've been seeing more improvement from the fella. He's dialed out of social media somewhat. That there are lots of positives that Lando can take away from 2025, even if he doesn't fulfill his ultimate goal and his lifelong dream of winning a drivers' championship. To that, Peter, you respond how?
Well, it's all nonsense. The only thing you want to win in Formula One is a world championship. And it's not, all the things he's done are not difficult to have achieved. I mean, when did I start saying that Lando needs to stop doing his social media and focus on the car and not worry about anything other than just feeling the surface of the road? I've been saying that for 18 months now. And so none of that's difficult. Of course, every driver should be a better driver at the end of every year in which they compete anyway. Any athlete should. Golfer, tennis player, footballer. If you're not better at the end of each year, you're not improving. And if you're not improving, you're going backwards. So I think it's a fatuous comment by whoever's making that because, yeah, of course, Lando's a better driver now. But I think he'd be an even better driver if he had Daniel Ricciardo in the other car. That's my point, because I think he could have focused even more on being Lando Norris and getting the best from himself in every race rather than having to worry about how to beat Oscar Piastri.
That would have been the line of least resistance 100%. But if I push back...
I'm not a great believer that having a super quick driver in the other car brings the best out in the other driver. If it's somebody of the quality of Lando or Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen or George Russell, or maybe even some of the younger guys coming through, Kimi or Isaac, that's not the way to get the best from them. I firmly believe that. And I say that because I've been watching Formula One for a long, long time, and I've seen so many examples of where that's actually ruined things.
Yeah. Is this not the dichotomy of Formula One, though? That it's gift and it's curse, that whilst it's very individualistic, is now and will always be, it's also a team game. So to balance both of those, Peter, is like, how can you with a straight face argue that it wasn't a good idea for McLaren to sign Oscar, who could be the next one potentially when Lando leaves or whatever? You don't know, you can't scenario plan for X factors and uncertainties. So maybe Lando leaves and then Oscar becomes the guy around whom you can build yourself a But
there's no proof in history at all that in order to win ongoing championships, you have to do it with a driver that you've groomed from day one in your own team. And history says the opposite. Quite often you can bring a driver in from the cold from another team, a quick driver who knows his stuff, and he can do the job straight away if the car is good enough. So that whole business of, we've got to have another driver for the next generation is complete nonsense. And anyway, Daniel Ricciardo wasn't that bad. Didn't he win the Italian Grand Prix for McLaren? I may be wrong there. I don't know. Yeah. I'm being facetious, obviously, but we're not talking about, sadly, we're not talking about Yuki Tsunoda. We're talking about Daniel Ricciardo, serious Grand Prix driver, very polished in the sort of second half of his career, very good at bringing a car home, very good with the sponsors, very good in the sim, capable of winning a Grand Prix if he has to in a good car, and being a great teammate for Lando Norris. That's what we're talking about. I'm not talking about, replacing some guy who's just there for the money or brings money in the back of the grid. I'm talking about Daniel Ricciardo. He was a very, very good very good other driver to Lando Norris. It's probably an insult to call him a number two. But Oscar is quicker. And that's why they did it. No other reason. And it's wrong because they had the right guy there. And because he's quicker, it's put all that pressure on Lando. And Lando's had to go through all this stuff that's actually, I think, on the contrary, I think that it's actually cost him points, having to worry about why he's not getting the best from himself. Should he have the Delta on the dash or not? Should he have this mind guy operating for him? Should he have that guy? Should he have a sports psychologist? All that rubbish is all because of Oscar Piastri and being in the other car. And so I would argue if they just kept everything calm and simple, Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, fine. And when Lando goes to another team or retires, believe me, there'll be plenty of quick drivers that Zach Brown could hire to replace Lando, and he'll have enough warning and he'll be able to do it, and he'll get his Charles Leclerc or his whatever, or his Oscar Piastri if Oscar's at Merck or whatever he is. You can get quick drivers, Isaac Hadjar, you can get these guys. You don't have to have them in the car for 5 years in order to promote them to be number one. It's, that's juvenile mismatch of Formula One with other industries, and it's not. Formula One is completely unique.
Yeah, singularity of focus.
Yeah.
GP.
Yeah, it's not like a football team where they want the best possible players. It's a team where you want one guy to get the best from the car and the other driver to support that in every way you can.
Yeah.
Whether it be with wins when you have a problem with the lead car, or whether it's with the sponsors, with the technology, whatever it is, that's the balance you want. You don't want two guys who are capable of taking points from one another and causing a rift down the middle of the garage because they're competitive, athletes.
Let me ask you about Max Verstappen, Peter, because some say that he had the quickest car. Some say that, again, that the Las Vegas Grand Prix was yet another, the latest in a long line of examples where Max Verstappen was the difference, that he didn't have the pace in qualifying, that the RB21 yet again was very mercurial. But Max Verstappen was a Gary Kasparov level chess player in the way that he outmaneuvered Lando into turn one. What do you make of this? Is this becoming a bit overblown as far as the Max Verstappen D1 level glaze, or is he worthy of every millimetre of the compliments that people are giving him?
I think the Red Bull was a very good car. The RB21 was a very good car. Certainly on dry tyres, in the race, and it wasn't bad on Friday, and it wasn't bad with the wets. It wasn't great on intermediates. To me, that adds up to the car has a sweet spot that is, when they're in it and they can stay within those operating limits of the sweet spot, it's not far away from the McLaren. It's probably not the McLaren, but it's not far away. And if you throw in the Max Verstappen factor, it's then probably better than a Norris McLaren or a Piastri McLaren package. But it's got a much smaller sweet spot. And that's what we saw in Brazil and Mexico. It's much more difficult to get the Red Bull to respond to ambience, track conditions, and the prevailing compound brought by Pirelli for that weekend than it is a McLaren. So overall, there is absolutely no doubt the McLaren is a better car. And I think it probably was even in the race in Vegas. I think if Lando had got the start clean and led from the start, I don't think Max would have got him. And I think he would have won that race and then been disqualified, interestingly. For sure, he still would have had the same problem with the plank. So in answer to your question, it's all to do with Max's ability to drive that thing within the envelope of the relatively small sweet spot that that car gives him. And he's very, very good at that. Not in terms of this is what we need to do with the setup. He's very good at driving within the limits, the barriers of what he knows is going to take the car into some sort of area where it's going to start bouncing, or he's going to get a little bit more graining on the left front or the right front or whatever it is. He's got a feel for that is probably better than any driver on the planet Earth. And that's where he's so good. And that's where Red Bull have a huge advantage with Max Verstappen, to be frank, because he is able to keep that car more or less within the envelope. As we say, you get to a circuit like Mexico with its very thin air, or you go to Brazil, and even Max can't do it. He did it in the race, but he couldn't do it in qualifying. And that's because of the tire temperature thing, this whole black art of Pirelli. Even he can't surmount that sometimes. But yeah, don't underplay the role of Max in any of this, because he is so good. And his understanding of what he needs to do with tire temperatures and where he needs to back off, where he can go a little bit quicker within the envelope is just uncanny. And I love the way they were giving him all the information on where George and Lando were saving the tires, looking after the graining in the early stages. And Max was assimilating all of that and not necessarily doing the same thing. That was the key to it. He was still doing his own thing, but he wanted to know where the other cars were having trouble with graining. And I loved the bit at the end when they were telling him that Lando was, starting to back away a little bit. And the first thing he wanted to know was who was near Lando. Was there any chance that somebody might beat Lando? Which shows the way his mind's working. He's thinking world championship for sure. That's all he wanted to know was, okay, I've got this win now. Let's hope Lando's not second, sort of thing, was the way his brain was working straight away. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I guess going back to radio messages, though, it's interesting, isn't it? That one, when the minute they said to Lando, you're not racing now just for the car and you go after Max, virtually the minute they said that, it all went wrong.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
Not very smart.
Well, it went wrong straight away because Max then set the fastest lap at that point and pulled out a couple of tenths. And as we know, even at the end, with no pressure at all, he set fastest lap on the last lap, just blitzed it.
From lap 36, Peter, when he hears that message, Lando Norris's engineer telling him, go and get Max. Between lap 36 and lap 50, there was no one lap sequential to the last that Max did outside of 2 tenths either side. So favourable and adverse variances. That was his level of consistency. And I just think that's mind-blowing. Peter managing for the tyres and everything that's going on and the fuel loads. He's just he's almost uncannily stoic.
And running at a higher ride height than McLaren, so less downforce.
True. Not to mention that.
And he gets out of the car and he's not even sweating. Good, isn't it?
No, he's not bad, this Max fella. He could go well, Peter, particularly over the next couple of Grand Prix. Do you think then that Max Verstappen, will he win the championship?
Isn't it? Because it's fascinating because just before this Vegas race came the announcement from Pirelli that every set of tyres is going to be limited to 25 laps in Qatar because of the curb fast corner combination there, unique in Formula One, which is odd to think of, but I guess it's partly because of this MotoGP circuit, isn't it, more than anything else. So that's interesting, because what that effectively means is that if you have a car that is better than the others with tyre management and a bigger sweet spot as a result, or because you got a bigger sweet spot, you're better with tyre management, let's put it that way, that advantage actually is now being diminished, because if that car enabled you to run, say, 35 laps and everybody else was going to come in on lap 31, now everybody's got to come in on lap 25, win, lose or draw. It actually helps the cars which have a smaller sweet spot and which are more aggressive with their tyres, and hurts the teams with cars like the McLaren. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, Red Bull, I would imagine, are pretty happy about that decision from Pirelli, and will be rubbing their hands going into Qatar now. It's an interesting first corner at Qatar. We've had a few skirmishes there, haven't we? Notably Max and George, I seem to recall.
Yeah, true. Jordan Lewis also.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. Do you think then, Peter, exam question, that Max Verstappen, 24 points now adrift of Lando, who's in the lead of the drivers' standings. Oscar Piastri now 24 points adrift of Lando also. Do you think that Max Verstappen can win a championship, forcing to become 5-time champion or no?
Well, it's still a win away, isn't it? And with 2 races to go, in order for them to be more or less equal going into Abu Dhabi, we got to have Lando DNFing in Qatar and Max winning, maybe second. That's a big ask. McLaren's reliability, touch wood, has been very good. Well, all right. Yeah, Zandvoort. Yeah, okay. So it could happen. I mean, who before Vegas would have thought both McLarens could trip up like that? Another team could trip up at Qatar. You know, let's not get too cocky about it or too critical of McLaren, because any team could, well, any team with 2 drivers fighting one another like that could, I suppose, you know, Ocon, Behrman sort of thing. But yeah, I see Red Bull being very, very calm right now and just being totally focused on the job they're going to do for Max, what they need for Qatar, how they're going to get that car to work around there, what are potentially going to be the weak spots, and try and get him on the pole and see what happens after that. And it's a sprint race, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good thing probably, actually, because again, there's not a lot of time to prepare. Red Bull will be quite good with that. And again, it's just like get in there, drive the car, get the best from it on a quick lap, don't use the curbs. And, you know, that's Max Verstappen, isn't it? So it's hard to imagine a Red Bull won't be pretty quick around Qatar. Again, you got to say, I can't imagine how the McLaren won't be the quickest car there. I'm sure it will be, but they're not unbeatable. And certainly Max is thinking, yeah, I can still win this championship for sure.
Oof.
Even if he's not saying that. He probably is now, I don't know, but he probably doesn't want to talk about it, but it's in his mind, no doubt.
No, he's definitely thinking about it.
Yeah.
That. You know that from the, like you said, George, where's Lando?
Yeah.
Is he in the threat? It's going to be interesting. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Talk to me about Oscar Piastri, because at one point I said this season that he was a dead cert for the championship. He had 1 million points in hand seemingly, and it was Oscar's to lose. He now 24 points adrift of Lando Norris. He looks like a driver forlorn in the scrum. In the post-race presser, he's like, listen, it wasn't an ideal weekend. He seems like he's trying to put a brave face on it, but it looks like his hopes are diminishing by the second. What's the story of Oscar Piastri's season? Help me try to understand the extent to which his form's dropped off in recent weeks.
Well, you weren't alone in saying that. I certainly said the same thing about Oscar when he had that points lead. I found it inconceivable that he could lose the championship, really. I just didn't know how he was going to do it in a car that good. And again, going into Vegas, I can imagine he was pretty depressed on Friday when Australia got bowled out. But when Australia won it before tea on the next day, he should have gone into the race thinking, yeah, Aussie grit. But it didn't show, did it? It was all the same Oscar that we've been seeing since Singapore. You could say Baku, but Baku was sort of so full of just mistakes, and he was quite quick there. But let's say Singapore, and it just hasn't changed for him at all. And it was interesting watching Antonelli, Piastri, Leclerc going round and round and round, with Antonelli doing an amazing job on those hard tyres, which he'd fitted to the car on lap 3. Shows how good the Pirelli hard was. And Oscar behind, presumably, he wasn't backing off through 13 like Lando, even at any stage of the race. He was doing a little bit of tyre management. Didn't look as if he was doing any plank management, and yet he could do nothing about Antonelli. He had one go with DRS, and Antonelli just got his braking spot on. Anyway, the point I'm making was that if you watch those 3, the odd man out actually is Oscar Piastri. He's the guy when they're going through 5, 6, 7. I think it's the slowish ones, and then 14, 15, 16. He's the one in the middle when there's the change of direction. He's got more load this way, and then he's got more load that way. And you've got Antonelli and Leclerc, to Antonelli's credit, almost identical in the way they're doing it. Just beautiful change of direction. And Oscar's every lap is just loading the rear a little bit more on both sides, just the way he drives. And he's just a little bit, and if you compared him with Leclerc, everything was a little bit wider on entry and a little bit more load here, and just driving on the rear of the car. And if you'd said, if you didn't know who was driving at all and you just come from Mars, but you knew roughly the characteristics of the drivers, you would have said, oh, that's Carlos Sainz in that McLaren, because he was driving just like Carlos Sainz in my eye, to my eye, and very wide entries. And Leclerc behind, just sort of zoom, 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 zoom like this, must have been wondering what the guy was doing. And equally odd that Oscar didn't benefit from following Antonelli on some of those corners and what Antonelli was doing so well there. He didn't. So what does that add up to? That adds up to a different Oscar now, to the one that joined McLaren with a very open mind and was out there following Max periodically whenever he could and watching what Max was doing and starting to get into corners a little bit earlier and generally improving almost by the race. All of a sudden, this whole championship lead, potential fight with Lando, can Lando do it? He's the chosen one at McLaren, but he's the new, Oscar's the new Australian star, the new Alan Jones, the new Jack Brabham, whatever. All of a sudden, it became too much. That's all I can say. Obviously became too much because it's too much to handle. It's too much pressure, too much outside influence, I guess. And he stopped improving as a driver. He stopped driving the race car he was in and started driving the race car that Lando Norris was putting together, which they were looking at with telemetry and doing all the cross references for. And we now know how much they do cross reference because they had exactly the same ride heights in Vegas. So, that's another interesting point. As I said earlier, rather superciliously, but it's a true point. Do you think that Max worries about what ride heights are on Yuki Tsunoda's car? I don't think he does. I think he does what is right for his car and what he needs to be able to do that. And I'm talking about Max and his engineers, obviously. But that's not like that at McLaren at all. It's, oh, well, Lando's running this ride height, boom, put it on Oscar's car, or Oscar's doing this, put it on Lando's car. Everything's very equal, and that's the problem. That is the problem. You can't run two equal cars when you've got two equal number ones and hope that it's going to be fair and happy for everybody. It isn't. It's never going to work out. And that's the point I was making from day one of the decision to hire Oscar. And again, to put it back the other way, so you don't get the wrong impression of what I'm saying, if Daniel Ricciardo was in the other car. Well, he's a poor example because having two Australians may not have worked out. But if you had, I don't know,
Carlos Sainz,
Gabriel Bortoleto in the other car and Oscar Piastri is your number one, I think Oscar Piastri right now would be half a second a lap quicker than he is, 3/10 consistently every race. I think he'd be a much faster, better driver than he is. And I think he's got slower and he's been worn down by Lando. But if he'd had a clear number two in the other car, it'd be plain sailing for Oscar. And you'd probably be easy world champion too by now in a McLaren. But that's the problem. They've cancelled one another out. Now we've got Max Verstappen sniffing around them both,
That dangerous times.
Yeah.
But for McLaren. Do you think, Peter, that there's something to be said for... some people are saying that Oscar Piastri can only at this point look at McLaren as if they're penning some sort of hagiography to Lando Norris, that this is Lando Norris's team. He's front and centre when it comes to Hilton and Air Wallach and Monster Energy, that Zach Brown is an ex-business affiliate of Lando Norris. So how then could McLaren not want to bend the knee and want Lando Norris to win the Drivers' Championship?
I think these are all the things that he would have been starting to feel when he had that big points lead. And it was all just happening relatively easily for him, relatively in italics. They're all the factors. As I said, Lando was the chosen one. He'd been there from day one, from the Zach's thing, and McLaren engineering team, no Lando, much better than they've ever known Oscar. And all those factors come into play. And that's why it's weighed down on him, and that's why he is where he is now. None of that would have happened if Lando hadn't been in the other car, and it was Oscar, as I say, with Bortoleto or I don't know, anybody in the other car. Yeah. Anybody not mega quick.
And Peter, ultimately this doesn't matter whether it's fact or fiction, if indeed there is downstream downside ramifications on Oscar Piastri's driving. But do you think there's truth to this, Peter, that Zach Brown, if he had a genie in a lamp and he could rub it, that he would have Lando Norris win the Drivers' Championship over Oscar? Do you think there's any truth to that?
Oh, 100%. I think from Zach's point of view, it'd be a beautiful ending to the story, wouldn't it? Joining McLaren anyway, transforming McLaren, Ron Dennis is not mentioned very much these days. Lando Norris was his driver from what, Formula 4, Formula 3 certainly. And then to win the world championship with Lando, yeah, why wouldn't he want that? Obviously, that's a given. But I thought you were going to say, if Zach was given a genie and he could go back for any wish, would he go back to think, I don't think I will take Oscar Piastri. I'll keep Daniel Ricciardo. That's what I thought you were going to say. And I wonder whether he would think that. He'd probably, no, I think he's sufficiently sure of his own decision-making process in his brain to think, no, I made the right decision. I'll never go back on that. But I think he made the wrong decision. And, I've said that a million times anyway. It's nothing new there. But I still think that either driver are capable of winning the world championship this year, but they needed to have a lesser driver in the other car to make it straightforward. Yeah. I still think Lando will probably do it. We all, we hope it goes down to Abu Dhabi, and a lot of us hope that it might be a different result. But the odds favour Lando, don't they? Still, obviously.
And if Lando does do it, they'll all look like absolute geniuses. If you were Oscar Piastri...
will they? I'm not sure they will they? Both cars disqualified, made heavy weather of it in what was the best car. Will they look like geniuses? I don't think they will.
Everybody only remembers the headline. There's an availability heuristic. All of those details will be lost in the roundings, right, Peter? If Lando, if can get it over the line. Just finally on Oscar, Peter, if you were Oscar's team manager, what would you your counsel to him in 2026 and 27 with a plethora of teams sniffing around a young hot prospect such as Oscar Piastri? What would your advice be to him?
But there aren't any vacancies, are there? I don't know what you mean for 26? He might leave at the end of this year? Or?
Red Bull will have a space and confirmed, I think.
Yeah, I think if I was managing Oscar and there was an offer from Red Bull for 26 and it wasn't going to cost an absolute fortune to get out of the McLaren contract, which is a big question mark, I suspect, I would put him in the Red Bull, I think. Yeah, I would. I think he would probably... I think he needs a fresh team, a fresh approach, and needs to sort of clear his head and become Oscar Piastri again, surfer, Australian racer. And I think Red Bull, it could be quite good for him because wouldn't be as much expectation because everybody knows Max is in the other car, so nobody's going to expect him to go and blow Max away. But equally, in theory, I think he'd probably learn quite a lot from Max, and he'd be good number two for him, good other driver for him anyway. So it could be quite a good thing for him to do that. I still maintain it would have been better had he stayed with Alpine and fulfilled the confidence they had in him to declare him as a race driver, have a poor season, obviously because the car was no good, but blowing Ocon away, and then getting an offer from a Mercedes or a Ferrari, or maybe even a McLaren at that point. I think that would have been better for him. And I think he would possibly have more options now had he done that. But, what's done is done. He went to McLaren. Obviously, if you're a young guy and you've got an Alpine offer here and a McLaren offer there, what are you going to do? It's a bit like Lewis, You got a Ferrari offer or you can stay with George Russell at Merck. What are you going to do? And so you don't blame Oscar for taking the McLaren. All I'm saying is that in reality, had he stayed at Alpine and had that McLaren thing not ever happened, I think he might be in a better position than he is now, or potentially going forward anyway.
Lest we forget, Peter, that in litigation terms, there is such a thing as unjust enrichment. If you stay at Alpine and get all of the benefits that come from having a contract, then it's reasonable to assume that we have a contract in place, is it not? But again, that's a sticky subject for another day potentially. And let me ask you, since you touched on Ferrari, Peter, what is happening? What is going on over there with Lewis and Charles? It feels like they both want to leave. Lewis was asked in the post-race scrum, will you be a Scuderia Ferrari driver next year? To which Lewis responded, you only get one question. He didn't even want to answer it. He's super negative about this year, probably even more negative about next year.
Well, why does he say that? I think that's rather. I think there are nicer ways of saying that to a journalist than you only get one question. Why does he say that? He's been around long enough to know that there's not much difference between staying 10 minutes at a interview scrum or 20 minutes in an interview scrum. And I think it's a bit impolite of him to say that. I'm surprised he said that. Probably put up by the Ferrari media department, I suspect. But it doesn't sound like Lewis to me. But anyway, putting that, it just shows, I suppose, how things have changed. But,
I was just about to say, Peter,
well, yeah.
in answer to your question super quickly, I think on the back of John Alkin saying that the drivers should drive more and talk less.
Maybe it's that. Okay, we'll only do one question now. Whoops, that was a mistake. Okay, yeah, good point. Well caught there, Cameron. No, I don't know. What do I think? I think it's a complete mess, as I said from day one. Lewis wasn't the driver that was right for Ferrari. Adrian Newey was the right engineer to have. They still have a sort of siloed system of engineering at Ferrari where nobody seems to know what anybody else is doing. And there's no sort of overall control of the car, the package, the technology, in the way that we thought Freddie Vasseur would be the overall controller, because that's what he said he was going to do. And simultaneously, you've got Lewis miserable, not even quick in the wet. I mean, what does that say about Lewis's situation at Ferrari? And everybody's sad for him, I think. I'm sad for Lewis because I don't like seeing Lewis in this situation, but it's getting worse. I mean, specifically in Vegas, it was another example of very poor management from the pit wall, where there was no communication to Lewis about the potential for the red gantry light to be on as he crossed the start-finish line, but not to worry about that because in reality, they had him down to within half a second of being okay. So as soon as Lewis crossed the start-finish line at the end of Q1, he saw the red light and thought he'd run out of time. And he hadn't. He actually had another lap to do. And that's very poor communication from Ferrari on the back of what happened in Mexico. So they don't seem to be improving in that area, which is bad. So you've got to say, Freddie Vasseur, John Elkann, please advise, poor management. And you're not getting the best from Lewis. And you're not getting the best from Charles because you're not giving him a decent racing car. And he's just having to drive the nails off that thing, and it just doesn't work. I mean, it's unbelievable performance from Charles all weekend in qualifying and the race, I thought, in a dog of a car. Excuse me, Dexter. But Charles deserves a race-winning car. We all know that. And just advice for Zach Brown: if you go for Charles Leclerc, do not put Lando Norris alongside him or Oscar Piastri. Go and get Marc Genet out of retirement, put him in the car or someone like
that. Go on then, Peter. Let me double click on the Lewis Hamilton aspect, because as a Lewis Hamilton fan and stan, I wanted to blame Scuderia Ferrari for specifically to qualifying and why that happened. I wanted to point all of my lenses and lay all of the culpability at the door of Riccardo Adami. But rewatching the way that so we can have the conversation about Riccardo's communication or lack thereof, that he wasn't as specific as you were just now, Peter, but you're a native English speaker, right? But Riccardo did say, push, 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 you've got the chance to do another lap here. And on hearing that, I'm like, sure, Lewis is a 7-time champion, Peter. So what, he's got to be able to interpret that message, knowing that Scuderia Ferrari have not been very good at communication erstwhile. Surely Lewis just buries the throttle and then everything else be damned. Maybe he has made it, maybe he hasn't made it, but that's Lewis Hamilton. And then I check out the lap before and I see that Lewis is collecting cones and he's doing the old Lando Norris thing and he's focused on the steering wheel and fiddling with brake biases versus focusing on the apex. I've never, again, to do the blind test thing, if you covered up the helmet, Peter, and showed me that driver and challenged me that was Lewis Hamilton of 2008 and 2018, I'd think that you were having a laugh. I'd really think that you were having me on.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the helmet, because just as I've been saying about Lando should, kill all his social media and just focus on being Lando Norris, racing driver. I've been saying that for a long time. I'm coming to the conclusion that Lewis should stop doing different helmets for every race, because I think he doesn't need to be doing that now. It's not appropriate given the situation he's in. He should be just going back to the original Rye House karting helmet colors and being Lewis Hamilton. And I say that not from a distraction point of view. I mean that from a theme, feeling from the soul racing point of view. That's what he needs to do. Stop all that ridiculous color scheme stuff he has. First point. Secondly, you make a good point about his engineer, but the engineer missed the point completely. You don't need to say to Lewis Hamilton, after everything that's happened in 2025, push, because that's lost its meaning now. Lewis knows when to push. He knows how to push. He knows what limits to take with the car in his own mind. The only thing that he needs to know is that if the red comes on, ignore it. That's the only thing he needs to know. Because as you say, 7 times world champion, he sees a red, he's going to stop immediately, isn't he? He's had enough penalties in his life. What's he going to do? You need to be thinking, oh, this is Lewis. He's potentially going to be looking at that gantry. Look where it is relative to us. We need to be very careful he doesn't react to that if he's there. And we'll tell him, do a countdown. Yes, go. Like that or whatever. Lewis will do the count line. As you get there, we'll tell you to go or not. That's what it needs to be done. And that shouldn't be happening over the air anyway. That, what I've just described, that little scenario, should have been talked about at the start of the year in terms of how to run Q1, Q2, Q3. And they should have code words for that. You know, there should be a code word that sums up the situation of you're going to be half a second okay, but there's going to be a red light glowing as you apparently go across the line. And that code word could be whatever can be, Cuba, squirrel, whatever you want to call it. Squirrel or squirrel, and you'll know immediately what it means. That's good management. All this other stuff, it's far too verbose. As you say, there's a bit of a language issue, but that's not really the problem. All you need is these catchwords. And, you know, I've been doing that for years with all the drivers I've managed, and it always works. And you only want one word that sums up a situation, and they know immediately what you think. And it may refer to their driving. It may be, you know, gentle, firm on the brakes, or back off here, save the left front, right front. You have all these catchwords. You don't have all this conversation, which sort of, to my mind, sort of comes from a university education where everybody is quite verbose and they all talk about different things and they have options down from A to Z, and it's all much too complicated. That's exactly my point that I make about Ferrari. It's not enough people with experience in the pit lane that just have one word answers. There's too much talk, too much rubbish going on at Ferrari at the moment, in my opinion, on air. And Lewis is not, oddly, Lewis is not able to get on top of that. Whereas Michael, in this situation that Lewis is in, would have been saying that, I think. Michael would have got that sorted months ago. But Lewis kind of, because he's so big and he's earning so much money and he's so global, I think it's almost impossible now for him to think in these microscopically small areas of racing that are so important, like helmet color, like the importance of that helmet color and what it means to you in your heart, A, or B, catchwords for really important things that are in Lewis Hamilton's life on a lap of a circuit like Vegas, thinking about that in advance, all the things that can go wrong. That's my point.
You know, Peter, I think that Lewis is trying, right? Because the one thing, I mean, I've been extensive in my criticism of Lewis for some of the things that you've just mentioned, but the one thing that you can't say is that Lewis isn't desperately trying to show Ferrari what good looks like, because he's been in around Mercedes for the longest time now, and he'll rock up to Canada, and when he sees the engineers setting up the car a certain way, that's why he says, well, I was watching them, what they were doing, knowing what good looks like in Canada, how to set up the car, and it makes no sense, were his words, I think, verbatim. So I think he's trying to institute for positive change, but he's been...
Well, of course he is, but what you just described there is what every race driver does.
Yeah.
They look at other cars, they look at their car, they look at setup. But again, I think, with respect, I think you're wrong, because that conversation that you just described should have been happening at Maranello.
But
before Canada, not when they get to Canada. It's too late, much too late.
But whose fault is that then, Peter?
Well, I don't know how much time how many bedrooms does Lewis have in his tiny apartment in Maranello? You know, is it a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom? Does he have his own bathroom, or is it just down the corridor? That's, you know, Phil Hill. If you want to be a race driver, what we were talking before this show about Roger Penske and his success. You know, where did Roger live at the peak of his time when he was growing his company, winning all those races with Mark Donoghue? Where did he live? He lived in a tiny apartment above his race shop in Reading, Pennsylvania, wherever it was, and then Detroit. And That's what it needs. If you want to be a great Ferrari driver, you've got to be eat, sleep, drink Maranello with the mechanics all the time, in my opinion, because it's so political. If you don't stay on top of things, it quickly gets away from you. It's no good arriving in Canada and saying what's going on with the setup. Much too late.
Yeah. I think
Because then you've eaten into time when you should be discussing code words that you need for the Canadian Grand Prix on all the things that could arise there.
Yeah. It's a good point.
And you have the code words because you know there's a bit of a disconnect with the language anyway. That's why you do all that.
It's tough, this, Peter. You make.
Well, is it? I don't think it is. I think it's relatively straightforward and logical, as Maurice Nunn always used to say. There's nothing magical or difficult about Formula One. It's just logic. It's not allowing all the stuff out there in the world, the big billboards which have your face on it, the Hilton ad, the HP ad, the chat shows, the social media, the money in the bank, whatever it is. It's allowing none of that stuff to penetrate your razor sharp racing brain. That's what it's all about. And that shouldn't be that difficult.
Operative word there, Peter, being shouldn't, but you are Lewis Hamilton, and Ferrari signed you not just because you're a brilliant driver. A first order priority, of course, because you're a brilliant driver and you can develop a car and you know what a good working culture looks like. But they also signed you because of brand Lewis Hamilton and the symbiosis of brand Hamilton alongside Scuderia Ferrari could be something that Formula One.
But nobody handled that better than Michael Schumacher. That's and true. Ferrari were the team that Michael was with. So if all Lewis needed to do was adopt the Michael Schumacher approach and be very limited on what you do with your sponsorship, obviously to the letter of the contract, you fulfill it. But it's not difficult. You don't have to walk around as if you're brand Lewis Hamilton. You need to walk around as if you're Lewis Hamilton, kart racer from Rye House. That's been very lucky in Formula One, had a lot of great races, a lot of great race cars, and now wants to win a lot of races at Ferrari and wants to have lunch with the mechanics every day. Isn't that what you do? Yeah. Why do you have to be this brand Lewis Hamilton 24/7? I don't think he is, actually. I think Lewis is a really nice guy. That's why I'm surprised that he said that to that journalist. But I don't think because he was hired as brand Lewis Hamilton, I don't think he needs then to be brand Lewis Hamilton. It doesn't matter. They've signed the contract. He can be whatever he wants to be. And he needs to be a racing driver then. You know, he's got plenty of years ahead of him to be brand Lewis Hamilton. But right now, he needs to be a race driver. And I'm not saying he doesn't try 100%. Of course he does, within the limits of what he creates in his bubble at Ferrari. I'm saying that the bubble is the wrong shape, and either too big or too small. I don't know whether either way, but he needs to be much more on top of the way they run him, the engineers I'm talking about, and he needs to be much more on top of his driving and what Charles doing with the car and why he isn't doing that with the car naturally and getting on top of that. And if it means going back to square one and hitting 1,000 bunker shots in the rain, do it, you know.
As much as I want to constructively push back, Peter, I feel like there is I've got to put my king down. I resign. Yeah, this is a checkmate as far as Lewis Hamilton's concerned, and but it just makes me feel sad, really sad. Yeah. Well,
don't be sad, as I've said all along, because ultimately he's earning a lot of money, and he's probably does enjoy his life when he's got over the previous race, and he's looking forward to the next one, and he's, you know, whatever he's doing, whether he's doing stuff as brand Lewis or whether he's doing it with his mates somewhere else, it doesn't matter. I'm sure he's a very happy, peaceful man, but ultimately it's such a shame. And I blame Freddie Vasseur, to be honest. Why isn't he doing all these things that I've been talking about? It's not difficult. They're very small things, really, in the overall spectrum of it all. And that's how you would get the best from Lewis. But none of that's happening. They're all just like in awe of the great Lewis Hamilton. Let him get on with it. He knows best, I guess. That's what they're thinking. And yet there's a massive disconnect there about what he apparently knows and what Ferrari thinks should be happening. And that's constantly showing through, as per the Q1 disaster at Vegas.
As we round third, Mr. Windsor, let me pick your brain very quickly on the rumour that Andy Cowell will be let go as team principal and CEO of Aston Martin, potentially by dint of some disagreements with the last airbender Adrian Newey, maybe to be replaced by Andrea Seidel, maybe to be replaced by Christian Horner. To that, Mr. Windsor, you respond how?
I think it'd be very sad for Aston Martin technically. It looks to me, and I always thought from day one, that he was hired for the wrong job. I mean, Andy Cowell is the man that made Mercedes powertrain what it is. And if you're now switching from being a Mercedes customer to having the prime Honda engine deal for 26 onwards, surely you would hire Andy Cowell to run your engine program. Why would you employ him as team principal or whatever? That doesn't make any sense. Even if Andy Cowell himself had said, oh, I've had enough of all that engine stuff, I want to be team principal, you should have had the ability to convince him otherwise and say, no, 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 you run the engine, Adrian will do the chassis, you'll both have dinner together a lot and we'll produce a great race car, which is what should have been happening. But I think they put him in the wrong situation. And I can imagine that Adrian's quite sensitive, whoever the team principal is, and I think he probably has come around to thinking that Andy Cowell has got too many of his own ideas, probably, and Adrian really wants to run the team, and he wants a sort of secretary, sort of to do what he wants, and that's all the other names you mentioned kind of fulfill that. I think, I'm not sure Christian would agree with that, but ultimately, if Adrian said to Christian, "This is what I want, this is what we're doing, I don't care, don't talk anymore, get on with it," I think Christian would say, okay, because he knows how good Adrian is. But Andy Cowell possibly said, well, I'm team principal here, this is what I want. And so it's just bad management again from the top, hiring the guy for the wrong job, really. Great shame from Honda's point of view, because Andy Cowell could have brought a lot to that program if he is going to leave. In my opinion, he's one of the great guys in engine engineering in Formula One. And he'll probably find a great slot somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe he'll go to Red Bull or something. I don't know. Not that Phil Prune needs anybody, because he's very good as well. So, I think it's just a case of being miscast, and they'll end up with a fairly bland sort of team principal thing, which is what they had before, wasn't it? And let Adrian get on with it, really. The team principal is Adrian. Once you got Adrian, he's basically a team principal, and nobody really is in a position to disagree with Adrian on anything.
Yeah.
Why would you?
No, maybe not in name, but definitely in substance. Mr. Windsor, you've been super generous.
But even in driver choice, if Adrian says, I don't want this driver, and everybody else does, and all the boardroom does, all the stakeholders, they'll still have to go with Adrian. Otherwise, Adrian will say, okay, I'm out of here.
Yeah, you've got to...
you go with Adrian, and you don't need a team principal if you've got Adrian Newey. You just need a good secretary for Adrian.
And he's earned that right, Peter.
Bit like Jackie Stewart. Jackie Stewart was Ken Tyrrell Jackie's secretary. I don't know, for a year or two, probably was. No, I'm being very unkind to Ken there, but Jackie ran that team, didn't he? Michael Schumacher ran Ferrari at the end of the day. He had a lot of good people around him, good lackeys around him. But and Adrian's a sort of Michael of 2026.
Yeah, a close equivalent.
Yeah.
Mr. Windsor, as you round third, super generous with your time as always. I want to ask you two final questions. In the first instant, give me a driver of the day. And then the second instant, I want to hear a prediction, Qatar Grand Prix. Who have you got for the race win?
Driver of the day, I'm very torn between Nico Hülkenberg or Max Verstappen. But I give it to Max, because he did actually win the race. And he did actually get on the front row in difficult conditions in a car that wasn't brilliant on the Inters. But I thought Nico drove really well too. So there you go, Max. And secondly, Qatar, I don't know. My logic, my brain says probably George Russell, but my heart says Max Verstappen. So, I hope my heart is right.
I mean, can you ever bet against Max Verstappen when he's in this rich?
Well, you can if the car's not at its 100% best, and a Mercedes or a McLaren is at its 100% best. It's very difficult for a Max in a below par Red Bull to beat a George Russell totally on it in a Merc around a circuit like Qatar. Yeah. But there's half a chance now, particularly with that rule, that I think the Red Bull will be right there. So that's why I'm hedging my bets a little bit, because it's famous last words. It's a bit like saying, you can go for Max now. And we saw what happened when they said that to Lando. I don't want to say Max is going to win Qatar, because I'm superstitious.
No, yeah, fair. Don't want to jinx it. Mr. Windsor, whilst you might not bat 1,000, 9 times out of 10, you come very, very... You're never a million miles away, Mr. Windsor, with these predictions. Are they? You don't give
I'm certainly not a Travis Head. And for those that don't know who Travis Head is, he's the guy that should have inspired Oscar Piastri going into the Vegas Grand Prix. But sadly, Travis's unbelievable century didn't do the job. But anyway, thanks very much, Cameron.
You're a legend, Mr. Windsor. And if you guys watching and listening enjoy yourself some market-leading purple sector F1 insights, and you're not a subscriber of the Peter Windsor YouTube channel already, I don't know what to say to you. What are you doing with your life? Really, genuinely, said without a hint of sarcasm. And shortly thereafter, get yourself over to your favourite podcasting platform. The pick to click is the short corners, 5 stars and follow. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, do me a favour, like, comment, subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcasting platform, if I can get my words out, do me a favour and 5 stars. As always, Mr. Windsor, you are a legend. It is a privilege words cannot convey. There are not superlatives.
Come on now, that's enough. Enough.
You're a legend, Mr. Windsor, and I make no apology for labouring that point. Between now and next time, chat the prosecution, as always, rest no further questions, Your Honour.